And the photographers are going crazy. I'm just making sure I don't have spinach in my tea. What? I'm just making sure I don't have spinach in my tea. Thank you for serving spinach. Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. I'll ask our audience to please take their seats. My name is Angela Greiling-Keene. I'm a reporter for Bloomberg News and the 106th president of the National Press Club. We are the world's leading professional organization for journalists, committed to our profession's future through our programming with events such as this, while fostering a free press worldwide. For more information about the National Press Club, please visit our website at www.press.org. To donate to our programs offered to the public through our National Press Club Journalism Institute, please visit press.org/institute. On behalf of our members worldwide, I'd like to welcome our speaker today and those of you in our audience. Our head table includes guests of our speaker as well as working journalists who are club members. And if you hear applause from our audience, I'd note that members of the general public are also attending, so it's not necessarily evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences. You can follow the action today on Twitter using the hashtag NPCLunch. After our guest speech concludes, we'll have a question and answer period. I'll ask as many questions as time permits. Now it's time to introduce our head table guests. I'd ask each of you to stand briefly as your name is announced. From your right, Jerry Zemsky, Washington Bureau Chief for the Buffalo News and a former National Press Club president. Sylvia Smith, Features Editor for the AARP Bulletin and also a former National Press Club president. Blair Shepard, the associate producer of Allegiance, Mr. Takei's Broadway-bound musical. Robert Yoon, National Press Club member and CNN Director of Political Research. Brad Takei, manager and spouse of George Takei. Skipping over the podium, Allison Fitzgerald, the financial editor for the Center for Public Integrity and the chair of the National Press Club Speakers Committee. Skipping over our guest for just a moment, Jeff Ballou, news editor for Al Jazeera and a member of the National Press Club Board of Governors and the Speakers Committee member who organized today's lunch. Thank you, Jeff. Donna Lindwan Leger, a reporter for USA Today and the past president of the National Press Club and the vice chair of the Speakers Committee this year. A lot of titles. Suzanne Struglinski with Baker and McKenzie and a member of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Carrie O'Reilly, an editor-at-large for Bloomberg News, and Jay Kuo, the composer of Allegiance. Our guest today is a kitschy 60s throwback. He's a gay rights activist. He's a cult hero. He's a major movie star. He's a social media phenom, and he's headed for Broadway. George Takei has one of the most varied and unusual biographies of anyone we've welcomed to the National Press Club podium. He's clearly best known for his role as Lieutenant Hikaru Sulu in the 1960s Star Trek television series, where he was often at the helm of the USS Enterprise. Although they were cordial on screen, Takei's frosty relationship with fellow Star Trek star William Shatner has fueled gossip reports for years. Takei returned for the blockbuster movie franchise, where after more than 20 years, he was finally promoted to captain. His acting career has spanned 5 decades, and he's probably one of the few who can claim to have appeared on The Courtship of Eddie's Father, MacGyver, The Muppets, and Howard Stern. But there's much more to Mr. Takei than acting. In 2005, at the age of 67, Takei announced to the world that he is gay. He has since been an advocate for the rights of the LGBT community. He and his husband, Brad, married in 2008, and a year later, they became the first gay couple to appear on the Newlywed Game show. Takei has attributed discrimination to what he calls the ick factor. He argued in a Washington Post op-ed last summer that people discriminate against people in actions that are unfamiliar. The ick, he says, is, quote, often the basis of the politics of exclusion. In addition to his cult following of Trekkies, many of whom are here in the audience today, Takei is a spectacular social media phenom. His Facebook page, where he posts jokes and grumpy cat photos alongside commentary about LGBT rights, counts nearly 5 million fans. On Twitter, he has 700,000 followers. As if he's not busy enough, Takei has recently embarked on a new project. He's heading to Broadway. Allegiance is a musical starring Takei and Tony Award winner Lea Salonga in a story about a family in a Japanese internment camp during World War II. The show is inspired in part by George's own story. He and his family were interred in camps in Arkansas and Northern California for much of his childhood. Please help me give a warm National Press Club welcome to a man who has done just about everything, George Takei.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here at the National Press Club, but the feeling I have is it's like a very elegant Star Trek convention. And that reflects on your good taste and high standards. It's wonderful to be back in Washington at last. And it's wonderful to have Washington back and working at last as well. Bravo for that. I love Washington. And when we arrived in the early evening last night, I saw all the things that I love about Washington. We were greeted by the national monuments in that dusky light. It was glowing, white and luminous. And I've visited all those monuments many, many times and been inspired by the words written on it. And there's one new addition to that collection of memorials here in Washington that I have not visited. That's the newest one, the memorial tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so the first thing we did this morning was grab a cab and we went to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. And we walked up to it, and there was Dr. King looming up out of that white stone. He had his arms crossed. He was standing strong and determined. But I looked at that face and I saw the gentleness and the compassion there. He is the only one of the American heroes memorialized that I have met and shaken hands with and conversed with. That is a very important and powerful and meaningful monument for me. And while looking at his face, I thought of those famous words of his dream. I have a dream speech. I have a dream. It is a dream that is deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of slaves and the sons of slave owners will be able to sit together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. I have a dream that my two little children will live in a nation where my four little children, he said, will be judged not by the color of their skins, but by the content of their character. Those were inspiring words. And I remember marching with him and raising our voices in song with him. And those words from the I Have a Dream speech were spoken from the Lincoln Memorial. So we went over to the Lincoln Memorial and climbed those steps. And there was President Lincoln looking majestic in his seat. And I thought of the words that all high school kids memorize, the Gettysburg speech. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And I stepped further away, and looking northwest, I saw the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, where I've been many, many times. And one of the things I enjoy of going to see a play at the Kennedy Center is during the intermission, I like to stroll along the river terrace and read the quotes from President Kennedy on the marble wall there. And I memorized one that particularly struck me. He said, I am certain that after the dust of the centuries have passed over our cities, we will be remembered not for the victories or defeats in the fields of battle or politics, but we will be remembered for our contribution to the human spirit, soaring ideals, soaring aspirations, American ideals. And from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, I looked down and I saw the Vietnam War and the World War II Memorial. These were people who fought, who sacrificed, and some died for those ideals of this country. And then I looked beyond that, and there's the Washington Monument, currently clad in a temporary, artfully designed scaffolding. You laugh, but I thought it looked rather ethereal and at the same time having substance, soaring up there to the sky. And I looked beyond that, far beyond that, and I saw the National Nut House. The place where some wackos close the government and throw hundreds of thousands of people out of work, and then they turn around and say they're creating jobs. These wackos that disrupt funerals for military personnel who died abroad. And then they say they're doing that to strengthen our military. It's absolutely crazy, absolutely irrational. And this on the other end of our National Mall. Total irrationality and the shining ideals of our nation. It's not two separate cities. It's the same city, and it's our national capital. And it is very representative of what America is all about, the irrational and the ideals. Those two opposites have defined my life totally, because I grew up as a child, imprisoned in barbed wire American prison camps. Pearl Harbor was bombed, and overnight, American citizens of Japanese ancestry were looked at with suspicion and fear and outright hatred. But despite that, young Japanese Americans, like all Americans, rushed to their recruitment centers to volunteer to serve in the military. This act of patriotism was answered with a slap in the face. They were denied military service and labeled enemy non-aliens. It was outrageous to call people who are voluntarily there to fight for this country the enemy, but to compound that by calling us non-aliens. non-aliens. What are they, non-aliens? They're citizens defined in the negative. We became enemy non-aliens, and we were summarily rounded up at gunpoint and imprisoned in 10 barbed wire American prison camps in some of the most desolate places in the country. I remember those barbed wire fences. I remember the tall sentry towers with the machine guns pointed at us. I remember the searchlights that followed me when I made the night runs to the latrine. But to tell you the truth, as a 5-year-old boy, I thought it was kind of nice that the searchlight lit the way for me to pee. I was too young to really understand what was happening. Children are amazingly adaptable. What would be grotesquely abnormal became my normality behind those barbed wire fences. It became routine for me to line up 3 times a day to eat lousy food in a noisy mess hall. It became normal for me to go with my father to bathe at a mass shower. It became normal for me to go to school in a black tar paper barrack and begin the school day with a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I could see the barbed wire fence and the sentry towers right outside my schoolhouse window as I recited the words, "with liberty and justice for all." I was too young to appreciate the irony of those words. But for my parents, it was the most painful, degrading, and turbulent period of their lives. A year into imprisonment, the government realized there was a wartime manpower shortage. And so as suddenly as they rounded us up, they opened the military for service by Japanese Americans. And as astounding as it might sound, thousands of young Japanese Americans, the same ones that were rejected, went from behind that barbed wire imprisonment, leaving their families in imprisonment, and volunteered to fight for this country. They were put into a segregated all-Japanese American unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and sent to the battlefields of Europe. They were sent out on the most dangerous missions, and they sustained the highest combat casualty rate of any unit of its size. They fought with amazing courage. They became heroes. And when the war ended, the 442nd returned to the United States as the most decorated unit of the entire war. And the American flag that covered the coffins of those that perished on those battlefields were delivered back to their wives or their parents, still behind those barbed wire fences. Stinging irony. That is a part of American history. When I became a teenager, I started reading civics books and history books. And I read about all the glorious chapters in American history, but I couldn't find anything about what I knew to be my childhood. So I engaged my father in conversations after dinner. Sometimes they became very heated. But from those conversations, I got a better understanding of our democracy. My father said, ours is a people's democracy. And it can be as great as the people can be, but it's also as fallible as people are. Our democracy is vitally dependent on good people being actively engaged in the process. Sometimes democracy's feet have to be put to the fire. And shortly after those conversations, my father took me to the Adlai Stevenson for President headquarters, and we volunteered in that campaign. And that was my introduction to electoral politics, and that was my introduction to advocacy for social justice. I became inspired by the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I was actively involved in the civil rights movement. And when the Vietnam War started, I joined in the anti-Vietnam War movement. I became a member of the EIPJ, the Entertainment Industry for Peace and Justice, and worked alongside people like Donald Sutherland and Jane Fonda. And in 1972, I became a McGovern delegate to the Democratic National Convention in Miami Beach. And in the 70s, when the movement began to get redress and an apology for that unconstitutional incarceration of Japanese Americans, I joined in with that as well. I testified at the Congressional Commission gathering information on the internment. I was involved in all the civil rights and social justice advocacy campaigns, except for one issue that was organic to me, that was an immutable part of me. From the time I was a young boy, I knew I was different in ways more than my Asian face. The other boys would say, Monica's hot. Sally's cute. I thought Monica and Sally were nice. But Bobby was exciting. Whenever he came near me or talked to me, my heart started to pound. But the other guys didn't feel that way. I was the only one, I thought. I was very alone. And I had a need to be part of the gang, to be part of everybody. And so I acted like Monica was hot and Sally was cute. I dated girls. I went on double dates. I went to the senior prom. I played a part. But as I got older, I met others who were like me, and I discovered gay bars. I was comfortable there. People were friendly, and they were who they were, as I could be who I was. I could relax. But I found something else that we shared in common. It was a fear of being exposed. We were living double lives. They told me about some gay bars that got raided by the police, and the patrons there were all herded out and loaded onto paddy wagons, taken to the police station, fingerprinted, photographed, and put on a list called deviants. That was a fearsome thing. So whenever I walked into a new gay bar, I always looked for the exits. We lived in constant, ever-present fear of being exposed. But in 1969, two earth-shaking events happened in my life. The first one was Star Trek got canceled. I had been working on a TV series for 3 seasons, and the ratings were low, and the network had the numbers to justify cancellation, and I was unemployed. But as low as the ratings were, Star Trek was a respected show, and it was a good credit. And so I needed to parlay that and build some momentum to continue my career. And all the way across the country, on the East Coast, in New York City, something else happened. There was a gay bar there called the Stonewall Inn. Its patrons were gays and lesbians and some drag queens. And on that July summer afternoon, the police decided to raid the Stonewall Inn. But this time, something different happened. The people inside the bar had had enough. They weren't going to take more of that bullying and the harassment. They fought back. Those drag queens stood strong on their high heel shoes and started throwing things. Empty beer bottles, salt shakers, chairs, everything that they could throw. And they fought fiercely and forced the police to retreat. They called for reinforcements, but in the meantime, inside the Stonewall Inn, phone calls were made to friends all around Greenwich Village. And by the time that police reinforcements arrived, people had been pouring out of the Greenwich Village buildings, and they attacked the reinforcement people with stones and trash cans and whatever else they could throw. A major riot ensued. And that riot continued for 6 nights straight. And that was the beginning of the gay liberation movement. It was the buzz in all the gay bars across the nation. All were thrilled and excited and motivated and galvanized. But I was silent. I had a career to protect. And then I had many relationships with many men, some brief, some more. And then I met a guy named Brad. He was a runner, and I was a runner, but he was a great runner. He was lean then. He was tight-muscled, and he was handsome. And he was the best runner that I had ever seen. And I heard that he had run a few marathons, and I'd never run a marathon. So I asked him to train me for my first marathon. And I finished that first marathon, thanks to Brad. And we became great running buddies. And soon we became more than running buddies. He moved in with me. And he too shared the fear that I had. This constant, serious disease started affecting a lot of our friends. They suddenly became very ill and started drastically losing weight and became skeletal and had to be rushed to the hospital frequently. And we were outraged by the kind of care that they got. It was perfunctory at best. The treatment that they got was reprehensible. It was AIDS. Organizations began to form to demand appropriate funding for research to find some way of dealing with this horrible disease. And it wasn't forthcoming. And so we, for the first time, donated money to a gay-related organization, but we remained silent. But the horror kept getting worse. Our constant fear had now turned to terror. It kept getting worse and worse and worse. And so I marched in my first AIDS walk. I became physically present on the issue, but I marched as an ally, a cloak to disguise me. But it kept getting worse and worse. And gay organizations, gay and lesbian organizations became very vocal and very visible. And that generated the homophobic blowback. And they were connected. They had politicians, some were gay politicians, members of that homophobic group. And they started institutionalizing their homophobia. They passed laws to confine us. Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Defense of Marriage Act. Those laws, to me, looked like barbed wires, legalistic barbed wires with the sharp, hard barbs of prejudice and ignorance. And still, I remained silent. But exciting, positive things started happening. The California legislature, both houses, the Senate and the Assembly, passed the Marriage Equality Bill in 2005. It was a landmark event. It was unprecedented. All it required was the signature of our governor to become the law of the state, the governor who happened to be at that time Arnold Schwarzenegger. When he campaigned for that office, he said, "I'm from Hollywood. I've worked with gays and lesbians. Some of my best friends are gays and lesbians." So I thought surely he would sign the bill. When he vetoed that bill, playing to his arch-conservative Republican base, we were enraged. But we were at home watching the news. And on the news, we saw young people pouring out onto Santa Monica Boulevard, venting their rage on Arnold Schwarzenegger. And we shared that rage, but we were at home, comfortable in bed. And we talked about it. And that's when I decided, I've got to speak out on this issue. We're getting so close, and we have people like Schwarzenegger to squash it. I've got to speak out. And for me to speak, my voice had to be authentic. And so I spoke to the press for the first time as a gay man. And we became actively and vocally and visibly engaged. I joined with the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, and went on a national speaking tour. I spoke at universities, at governmental agencies, at corporate meetings. I came to Washington and lobbied our legislators. I went to Sacramento and lobbied our legislators. And things began to happen. In California, our state Supreme Court in 2008 ruled that marriage equality is indeed constitutional according to the California State Constitution. And so Brad and I immediately seized that opportunity and got our wedding license in West Hollywood. We were the first couple to get that license. And we were married in the Democracy Forum of the Japanese American National Museum. We loved the idea of getting married in the Forum of Democracy. And we had 200 of our relatives and friends there with us. And amongst them was a distinguished American. He was a veteran of the Second World War, a member of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, a bearer of the Medal of Honor, the highest recognition, military recognition the nation can grant. And he was the senior senator from the state of Hawaii, a very good friend of ours, the late Senator Daniel Inouye. He was there as our guest at our wedding, and we were absolutely thrilled. Other good things started to happen. The Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act was passed. Don't Ask, Don't Tell fell. And now gays and lesbians can serve proudly and openly as who they are. They are true patriots, having gone through that period of silence. And this summer, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that marriage equality is indeed constitutional in the states that approve it. 13 states plus this city, our national capital, has marriage equality. But our work is not done yet, because when I pledge allegiance to the flag, I pledge allegiance to one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have divided our nation, 1/3 with equality and 2/3 with people who hunger for equality but do not have it. Our work is not done, but I'm optimistic because recently in California, the California field poll showed that 78% of young people under 39 support strongly equality for LGBT people. 78%. It's a matter of time. I'm very optimistic, and I love young people, especially young straight couples, because they're going to be making the gay babies of tomorrow. And it is for them that we have to be change agents today, because my life has been shaped and formed by people that I consider change agents. Those young men who went from behind those prison camp fences to fight for this country, and some to die for this country. They changed America for us, Japanese Americans, and they were my change agents. My parents were also my change agents. When we were let out of the camp, our first home was on Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. We didn't have anything. And from that, by working long, hard hours, they gave their 3 children fine educations in outstanding, great American universities. The University of California at Berkeley, the University of California at Los Angeles. The University of Southern California and Marquette University in Wisconsin. They were our change agents. And yes, those drag queens at the Stonewall Inn also are my change agents. This nation has been defined by change agents. When this nation was founded, women had no rights. They couldn't vote, they couldn't own land, they couldn't even have rights over their own children. But because determined women and fair-minded men challenged and debated and marched for equal rights for women, that today we have 3 women sitting on the Supreme Court of this country. We've had 3 women serve as U.S. Secretaries of State. And we've had a woman astronaut lead a team of astronauts and go soaring out into space. They were all change agents. The first change agents were our founding fathers, who articulated the shining ideals of this country. They were change agents, but they also kept other human beings as slaves. And because those slaves hungered for freedom and justice, and they struggled for it, and because their children and their grandchildren and the generations that followed continued their struggle through the Jim Crow years and through the years of the Civil Rights Movement inspired by Dr. King's eloquence, today we have an African American in that big white house on Pennsylvania Avenue. And they are all change agents. We are a nation of change agents. And that's why I'm optimistic about our future. But I still have a continuing, ever-present fear. I fear that big white building with a dome on it at the far end of Pennsylvania Avenue. We still have January 15th and February 7th. Be afraid, America. Be afraid. Thank you very much. Can I remain here?
Thank you. We have, as you might imagine, a lot of questions on a lot of topics, so we'll try to cover a little ground in a bunch of areas. This questioner asks, you talked about the work yet to be done in terms of gay marriage being legal in all states. What do you see as the next civil rights fight on the horizon after gay marriage?
We still have a long ways to go. As long as there are young people bullied and made to feel very inferior, as long as young people get kicked out of their homes when they come out as gay or lesbian, and as long as some young people feel that their future is so hopeless and they kill themselves, we have a lot to do. We have to have, first of all, education, and then some legislation to make sure that those horrible things don't happen to young people.
This questioner says, for first-generation Americans whose parents aren't as progressive or liberal in thought as many parents born in the U.S., what advice do you have for bringing up touchy subjects such as being gay?
That's very difficult, and it depends on the culture from which that first-generation parent comes from. I'm most familiar with the Asian culture, and particularly the Japanese culture. The Japanese culture is not so shaped and ruled by religion as it is here, the Bible. It's primarily a Buddhist nation, which the culture is to work collectively, and it's a very well, they have a big middle class, and so there's a lot of egalitarianism. And because it's a collective society, they like everything to be like everybody else. And it's so much not religious values, but being a part of a comfortable society. So for young people to come out in a society like that, there isn't that fear of being struck down by the devil or anything like that. The concern is it's going to embarrass the family. And once society is educated, it's not going to be an embarrassing thing. And that's why I think it's so important for more silent gays and lesbians, particularly in the Asian culture, to come out, be open, be as they are, insurance salesman, school teacher, policeman, whatever you are. And it makes it more socially acceptable. There was a quote that I was going to suggest putting on the Congress, the wall of Congress, because I use a lot of quotes on the memorial. And what I think of is the quote from a great former congressman who said, in these days, it's more socially acceptable to be gay than to be a congressman. I think that should be carved into the walls there.
You talked about your enjoyment of running, and you carried the 1984 Olympic torch. You've called on the International Olympic Committee to move the 2014 Winter Games out of Sochi because of Russia's laws banning the promotion of gay relationships. We've got the games now less than 4 months away. Do you think that the U.S. should boycott those games for that reason?
No, I don't believe in a boycott because the athletes that participate in the Olympics have been training for years now, and they're reaching their peak, and they should not be penalized. The homophobic laws in Russia that was passed recently, you know, when they made the presentation to the IOC, the International Olympics Committee, to have the right to present the Winter Olympics at Sochi, Russia, they pledged to honor the Olympic Code, which says no discrimination. They breached that pledge. Russia needs to be punished, but it's too late to pull it out of Sochi now. And we've sent messages and petitions to the International Olympics Committee to be responsible and to call Russia out on the breaching of their pledge. Apparently, they had some conversations with politicians there, and a couple of politicians have been quoted. The Minister of Interior, which controls the police, said the laws of Russia will be honored, and anyone who cannot will be tried. And the Olympics Committee reported that there's nothing we can do about it, so we are comfortable about the Olympics being staged in Sochi. The International Olympic Committee is spineless. They need to have some backbone because they are charged with upholding the Olympic creed, and something should be done with the membership of the IOC.
This questioner says she did not learn about the internment of Japanese Americans until she was in high school watching Farewell to Manzanar. It says her mother was also ignorant. How do you feel about the lack of awareness of this chapter of American history?
That is a very regrettable part of American history. I think we learn more from those chapters of our history where we faltered than from the many, many glorious chapters that we have. And it's important that we learn from our mistakes. And if we don't know about it, we will keep repeating the same mistakes again. That's why we founded the Japanese American National Museum. We're an affiliate of the Smithsonian. We send our exhibits throughout the country. As a matter of fact, Senator Inoue was the chairman of our Board of Governors. He was a strong and active supporter of the museum. And we've worked with the Teachers Association in Arkansas. That's where we were first incarcerated, in southeastern Arkansas. And we've established teaching curricula on this subject of the internment of Japanese Americans. And it's being taught in the Little Rock schools. And that's sent out its ripple effects. There were two internment camps in Arkansas, both in the swamps of the southeastern sector. We were at a camp called Rower, and there was another camp called Jerome. And in the middle of those two internment camps is a small town called McGee. And they recently, earlier this year as a matter of fact, converted their abandoned railway station into the World War II Japanese American Internment Museum. It is a small museum, but it's very comprehensive and beautifully done. So if any of you should be driving around southeastern Arkansas, you might visit that museum in McGee, Arkansas.
What is the status of Allegiance, your musical about the internment of Japanese Americans? When is it likely to come to Broadway? And following on that, when's it likely to tour in D.C.?
Yes. Allegiance began about 3 years ago. We developed this musical, and we developed it because we can have books and lectures and talks about the internment, which helps us understand up here intellectually. But the most powerful way to understand a story is to feel that story. And musical theater hits you here emotionally. It humanizes that story. And so we developed Allegiance, and we first opened at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego, a distinguished regional theater. We were greeted with rave reviews, and that was followed by sold-out houses, and our run was extended another week. And when we finally closed, we had broken all box office and attendance records at the 77-year-old Old Globe Theater. And then we won the Best Musical of 2012 from the San Diego Critics Circle. So that augurs well for our transfer to Broadway. However, something unusual is happening this year. Usually, there are few new plays and musicals coming into Broadway, and there are theaters that are dark. This year, we have a plethora of musicals and dramas trying to find a theater in Broadway. And we're particularly fussy. We want a certain size capacity theater. We're looking for a theater around 1,200 to 1,400 seats. And it's very difficult to come by. So we're like vultures perched on Times Square buildings, looking down, looking for the weak ones, and waiting for them to die.
Moving on to social media. You're known as the king of Facebook for everything from grumpy cats to this week opinions on aging. What have you learned from your popularity on social media? Any surprises that you've discovered in that world?
Well, let me give you a little background on why and how my social media activity started. And it's related to allegiance. We developed this musical. We invested a lot in it, both our energies, our ideas, and our resources. But it's about something that's little known in America. And it's a rather unhappy chapter of American history. And so, first of all, we had to raise the awareness, because there's so many people, still to this day, people that seem well-informed, who tell me that I knew nothing about this internment story. So we had to raise the awareness of Americans about the internment of Japanese Americans. And then, once the awareness is raised, we wanted to let them know that there's a musical on it. And there are wonderful songs, moving songs, and great production numbers that are jazzy and razzmatazz to Broadway musical numbers. There's one on baseball that's a real terrific number. And it's relevant to the story because it was playing baseball that made us a community. It brought us all together. And so we developed this musical, and we wanted to let people know that there is this musical, and then to whet their appetite and make them want to come and see it. And so the best way to do that is via social media. And so I began on social media, but my base is made up of sci-fi geeks and nerds. You're there. Yes, I see you. So we had to develop that. And the best way to do that, I thought, was to say funny things about sci-fi or science itself. And then occasionally, throw some serious tidbits in. And as the audience grew, I talked about LGBT equality. And suddenly, the audience grew even more because there's a great overlap between sci-fi geeks and nerds and the LGBT community. And then I started blogging about the internment of Japanese Americans, and it opened a few eyes there, and there was a lot of engagement there, and it kept growing and growing. And so that's why we began the social media campaign. What I learned is that there are millions of people out there. I had no idea it was going to grow so big. I'm absolutely astounded. I mean, it's like Topsy from Uncle Tom's Cabin. I just growed. And so what I've learned is that there are a lot of people out there that you can reach via social media. And the best honey to catch those flies with is humor. Something funny will always grab them.
And we've got a couple questions about oh my. Tell us about the genesis of that.
Yes, somehow my oh my has become my signature. I've been using it all my life, because it's a word that, when you're surprised, you say oh my. When something wonderful happens, you say oh my. And then, when you see a beautiful sunrise, a radiant sunrise, you say, oh my. Or when we land the man on the moon, you say, oh my, I mean, it's a very handy and all-encompassing word. And I've been using it all the time. But I had one experience that started it all off as my signature. I did the Howard Stern show. And yes, there's a Howard Stern fan. And Howard Stern says a lot of outrageous things. And so I, in response to something outrageous he said, I said, oh my. He had it on tape, and that's all he needed. So whether I'm there or not, when someone says something outrageous, he has a button and he presses it, and my voice comes on. Oh my.
We certainly can't leave today without a Star Trek question or two. One person asks, how did your fellow starter cast members embrace your coming out?
At the end of the week, we have what we call wrap parties. The beers rolled out and the pizzas brought in, and people bring their wives or girlfriends, or the women bring their husbands or their boyfriends with them to join us for the end of the week wrap party. And initially I was bringing my friends who happened to be girls, but later I started bringing my buddies. One day there'd be Ron, and the next week there might be Mel, and then another week there might be a Brad. And, they're sophisticated people. They said, oh, George. Mm-hmm. I get it. But they understand that if they talked about it, it would be damaging to my career. And they're cool people, so they remain silent. But occasionally I get some clues from them. When we report to the studio in the morning, before we go to our dressing rooms, we go to makeup, get into makeup, and then gather around the coffee urn and sip coffee. And this particular morning, I was at the coffee urn with Walter, and we were chit-chatting. And all of a sudden, Walter starts going like this, urging me to turn around. So I turned around to look, and there was this drop-dead gorgeous extra dressed in that tight Starfleet uniform. And my heart stopped. And then I turned around and looked at Walter, and Walter was smiling, and he went, I knew he knew now.
We are unfortunately almost out of time, but before asking the last question, just a couple of housekeeping matters to take care of. First of all, I'd like to remind you of our upcoming speakers. On November 5th, we have Goldie Hawn, actress and founder of the Hawn Foundation. And on November 11th, Walt Bettinger, president and CEO of the Charles Schwab Corporation. Second, I would like to present our guest with the traditional National Press Club coffee mug.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. And for the last question, tell us, are there gay Vulcans? And if so, How do they socialize?
I can answer that. It's a changed world now. We have the new version of Star Trek. The last two movies had younger actors playing our roles. The actor who plays Spock, a Vulcan, is played by Zachary Quinto, who's gay. We have an out-gay Vulcan, and he happens to be Spock. And Zachary is a real great guy, and he's also a very serious actor. As you know, he was on Heroes, and I was Mr. Nakamura, the powerful, wealthy, mysterious Mr. Nakamura, the father of Hiro, who has magical powers. And Zachary was the villain in that. He had evil powers. But after the series was canceled, he went to New York, and he'd been doing off-Broadway plays. And he did a very challenging role in a great American drama, Angels in America, playing the gay attorney. Or he was not an attorney yet, but a very important, dramatic, demanding role. And he got very good reviews for that. And he just opened on Broadway with a wonderful actress, Cherry Jones, won 2 Tony Awards in Tennessee Williams' The Glass Menagerie. And he's playing Tom Wingfield. And he got luminous reviews. I think he was, but the New York Times said he was the best Tom Wingfield that he had ever seen. And there have been many, many Tom Wingfields. So Zach is a wonderful actor. As a matter of fact, we have tickets to see him in the Glass Menagerie tomorrow, as a matter of fact. We're headed to New York right after this event here. And so he's a gay Vulcan. That's how Vulcans celebrate. They become serious actors.
Thank you. Thank you for coming today. I'd also like to thank our National Press Club staff for helping organize today's event. And here's a reminder, you can find more information about the Press Club as well as a copy of today's program on our website, www.press.org. Thank you. We are adjourned.